The cabin smelled of old pine resin, wood smoke, and the faint, lingering scent of lavender that seemed to cling to the curtains years after Martha had gone. Outside, the Montana winter was not merely a season. It was a living, breathing entity. It pressed against the frosted glass of the windows, a vast ocean of white that stretched endlessly toward the horizon, swallowing the fences, the old truck, and the road that led back to civilization. Thomas sat in his leather armchair, the leather cracked and worn in the shape of his body after decades of use. At 72, his joints predicted the weather better than any news anchor on the radio. Tonight, his knees ached with a dull, throbbing persistence that told him a heavy storm was coming. He reached for his mug of coffee, now lukewarm, and took a slow sip, his gaze fixed on the dancing flames in the stone fireplace. The fire was the heartbeat of the house, the only thing keeping the biting cold at bay. At his feet lay Rusty. The golden retriever was no longer the boundless ball of energy he had been as a puppy. Like Thomas, time had painted him with its brush. His once deep red coat was now dusted with the snowy white of age around his muzzle and eyes. Rusty let out a deep, contented sigh, shifting his weight on the rug, resting his heavy head on Thomas's slippered foot. It was a simple gesture, but to Thomas, it meant everything. It was a reminder that he was still anchored to this world. "Cold night, isn't it, old boy?" Thomas whispered. His voice was raspy from disuse. Rusty's tail gave a gentle thump-thump against the floorboards, but he didn't open his eyes. He knew the voice. It was his safety. Thomas looked over at the empty rocking chair across the room. It had been Martha's spot. 3 years ago, the house had been filled with her humming, the clinking of knitting needles, and the warmth of her laughter. Now, the silence was heavy. Sometimes, the silence was so loud it rang in Thomas's ears. He remembered the day Martha brought Rusty home. It was a rainy Tuesday, 8 years ago. She had walked in with a bundle of wet fur inside her coat, her eyes sparkling with a mischief that Thomas adored. "He needed a home, Tom," she had said, "and we need a little noise." She was right. Rusty had filled the empty corners of their lives. And when Martha passed, quietly in her sleep one autumn morning, Rusty was the one who licked the tears from Thomas's face. Rusty was the reason Thomas got out of bed those first dark months. The dog needed to be fed. The dog needed to be let out. The dog needed him. And in needing him, Rusty had saved him. The wind outside began to pick up, changing from a low whistle to a mournful howl. The timbers of the cabin groaned under the shifting pressure. Thomas glanced at the window. The snow was falling harder now, thick sheets of white erasing the world outside. The temperature on the thermometer by the door was dropping fast. Thomas shivered involuntarily, despite the fire. He set his mug down on the side table, next to a framed photograph of him and Martha from their 40th anniversary. "We should get more wood, Rusty," Thomas murmured, placing a hand on the dog's soft head. "It's going to be a long night." The storm wasn't just knocking at the door anymore. It was preparing to break it down. And in the quiet warmth of the cabin, neither the old man nor the old dog knew that this night would test the limits of their bond like never before. By 9 o'clock, the world outside had ceased to exist. There was only the white void and the wind. It screamed around the corners of the cabin like a wounded animal, shaking the heavy wooden door in its frame. Inside, the temperature had dropped noticeably. The fire, once a roaring comfort, had burned down to a bed of glowing orange embers. Thomas pushed himself up from the armchair. His joints protested with a sharp stiffness. "One more log," he muttered to himself, gripping the handle of his cane tightly. "Just need one more log to last the night." He took a step toward the woodpile near the hearth. Rusty lifted his head, watching his master with alert, amber eyes. Then it happened. It wasn't a dramatic event. There was no explosion, no intruder. Just a simple, cruel twist of fate. As Thomas shifted his weight, the tip of his cane slipped on a smooth patch of the floorboard. He tried to correct his balance, but his 72-year-old legs were not fast enough. He fell backward, hard. The sound of his body hitting the floor was followed by a sickening crack that echoed in the small room. A bolt of white-hot agony shot up from his hip, tearing a scream from his throat that was instantly swallowed by the storm outside. "Ah!" Thomas gasped, his face twisting in pain. He squeezed his eyes shut, waiting for the wave of nausea to pass. When he opened them again, the ceiling seemed miles away. Rusty, he wheezed. In an instant, the golden dog was there. Rusty whined, a high-pitched sound of distress, and licked Thomas's face frantically. His tail was tucked low between his legs. He nudged Thomas's shoulder with his wet nose, as if saying, "Get up. Please, get up." Thomas tried. He gritted his teeth and attempted to push himself up on his elbows, but the pain in his hip was blinding. He collapsed back onto the rug, breathing heavily. He looked at the telephone on the small table by the hallway. It was only 10 feet away. It might as well have been 10 miles. He glanced at the fireplace. The embers were fading. Without new wood, the fire would be dead in an hour. In this weather, without heat, the cabin would become a freezer before morning. The realization hit Thomas colder than the wind outside. "I am going to die here." Rusty barked, a sharp, demanding bark at Thomas. The dog paced back and forth between Thomas and the door, his claws clicking anxiously on the wood. He sensed the fear rolling off his master in waves. I can't move, boy," Thomas whispered, his voice trembling not just from pain, but from the cold beginning to seep into his bones. He reached out a shaking hand and grabbed Rusty's collar. He pulled the dog's face close to his own. "Rusty, listen to me." Thomas stared into the dog's eyes. "You have to go. Go to Miller's. Go get help." Rusty tilted his head. He didn't understand the words, but he understood the tone. It was the tone Thomas used when it was time to work. Thomas pointed a trembling finger toward the kitchen. The back door was swollen shut from the ice, but there was a small ventilation window near the floor that they kept unlatched for air circulation in the summer. It was small, too small for a man, but maybe, just maybe, big enough for a determined dog. "Go," Thomas shouted, summoning the last of his strength. "Go." Rusty hesitated one last time. He looked at the dying fire, then at his fallen master. With a low growl of determination, he turned and ran to the kitchen. He leaped onto the crate beneath the window, pawing at the latch until it gave way. He shoved his nose through, pushing the frame open. A blast of snow and freezing air exploded into the kitchen. Rusty didn't look back. He squeezed his broad shoulders through the opening, scrabbling against the sill, and tumbled out into the dark, frozen night. Inside, Thomas lay alone in the dimming light, whispering a prayer into the silence. The moment Rusty hit the ground outside, the world disappeared. There was no sky, no ground, no trees. Only a swirling, blinding chaos of white. The wind didn't just blow. It struck him like a physical blow, threatening to knock him off his paws. The snow wasn't the soft powder he used to play in as a puppy. It was heavy, wet, and waist-deep. Rusty sank immediately. The cold was an instant shock, piercing through his golden coat, reaching straight for his skin. He shook his head, trying to clear the ice that was already forming on his eyelashes. He looked back at the cabin. The faint glow of the kitchen light was the only thing visible in the dark. Instinct screamed at him to go back. Scratch at the door. Bark until he lets you in. It's warm inside. It's safe. But he heard Thomas's voice in his head. The desperate command. Go. Rusty turned his back on the light and faced the darkness. He took the first step. The journey to the Miller farm was 2 miles. On a summer day, Rusty and Thomas could walk it in 40 minutes, stopping to smell wildflowers and chase squirrels. Tonight, 2 miles felt like a journey to the end of the earth. He moved by memory. The road was buried, so he followed the scent of the fence line, though even that was being scrubbed away by the storm. Every step was a battle. He had to leap, sink, pull himself out, and leap again. It was like swimming through quicksand. 1 mile, his lungs burned. The cold air felt like swallowing shards of glass. His old legs, stiff with arthritis, began to tremble. Ice balls formed between the pads of his paws, cutting into his flesh with every step. He whimpered, a sound snatched away by the gale, but he kept moving. The struggle. Halfway there, the wind changed direction, hitting him head-on. A massive gust knocked him sideways, rolling him into a drift. Rusty lay there for a moment. The snow began to pile over him instantly. It was surprisingly warm under the snow. It was quiet. The pain in his legs started to fade into a numb, heavy sleepiness. Just close your eyes, the storm whispered. Just rest for a minute. Rusty's eyelids drooped. His breathing slowed. The darkness was inviting. But then, a smell cut through the freezing air. Not a real smell, but a memory. The smell of old leather and tobacco. The smell of Thomas's hand. He saw the image of the old man lying on the floor, alone, the fire dying out. A surge of adrenaline, primal and fierce, shot through his body. Rusty exploded out of the snowbank with a defiant bark. He wasn't just a dog fighting a storm. He was a guardian. He was on a mission. He pushed forward, ignoring the pain, ignoring the cold that was slowly shutting down his body. He lowered his head like a battering ram, plowing through the drifts. Finally, after what felt like a lifetime, he saw it. A tiny, yellow speck in the distance. A light. The miller's porch light. Rusty tried to run, but his legs finally gave out. He collapsed, sliding the last few yards on his belly. He dragged himself forward with his front paws, inch by inch, until he reached the wooden steps of the porch. He didn't have the strength to bark. He tried, but only a raspy croak came out. He threw his heavy body against the front door. Thud. He did it again. Thud. And again. Thud. He scratched at the wood, his claws leaving deep grooves, whining with the last breath in his lungs. Please, he thought. Please hear me. Inside the house, the television was on loud. The wind was howling. Rusty slumped against the door, his vision tunneling to black. He had given everything. Now it was up to fate. Inside the Miller farmhouse, the warmth was thick and cozy. The television blared the evening news, masking the roar of the blizzard outside. John Miller was dozing off in his recliner, while his wife, Sarah, was knitting. Suddenly, Sarah stopped. She tilted her head. John, did you hear that? John grunted, half asleep. Hear what? Just the wind, Sarah. No, she insisted, standing up. It sounded like a scratch. At the door. She walked to the hallway, pulling her shawl tighter. When she cracked the front door open, the wind tried to rip it from her hands. She looked down and gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. John, get help. Hurry. There, half buried in a drift on the porch, was a mound of golden fur, encased in ice. They dragged the heavy dog inside. As the warmth of the hallway hit him, Rusty let out a low, painful moan. John recognized him immediately. It's Rusty, Thomas's dog. John looked at Sarah, his face pale. Rusty never leaves Thomas. Never. Not in 8 years. The realization hit them both at the same time. The dog hadn't run away. He was sent. Get the truck, Sarah said, grabbing her coat. And call the sheriff. Something's happened to Thomas. The next few hours were a blur of red flashing lights cutting through the white snow. The sheriff's deputies had to break down the door of the cabin. They found Thomas unconscious, his skin blue, the fire long dead. But he was alive. Barely. 2 days later, the sterile beeping of a heart monitor replaced the sound of the wind. Thomas opened his eyes slowly. The hospital room was bright. His hip was wrapped in a heavy cast, and his body felt like it had been run over by a freight train. A nurse noticed him stirring and smiled gently. Welcome back, Thomas. You gave us quite a scare. Thomas tried to speak, but his throat was dry. He managed only one word, a hoarse whisper. Dog? The nurse's smile widened. She didn't say a word. Instead, she walked to the door and opened it. There was a clicking of claws on the linoleum floor. A bit slower than usual, a bit of a limp in the back leg, but steady. Rusty walked into the room. His coat was clean and brushed, though you could still see the healing scratches on his nose from the ice. He didn't jump. He walked right up to the bed and rested his chin gently on Thomas's chest, right over his heart. He let out a long, heavy sigh, the sound of a mission completed. Thomas wept. He buried his hands in the thick fur, sobbing freely, washing away the fear of that dark night. You saved me, Thomas whispered into the golden fur. You crazy, stubborn boy. You saved me. Winter eventually turned to spring. The snow melted, revealing the green grass of the mountains again. Thomas and Rusty returned to the cabin. Thomas walks with a slight limp now, and Rusty sleeps a little more than he used to. But if you pass by their porch in the evening, you will see them. An old man in a rocking chair and a golden dog at his feet. They say a dog is man's best friend. But looking at Rusty, Thomas knows that isn't quite right. A dog isn't just a friend. In the coldest storms of life, when the fire is dying and the darkness is closing in, a dog is the keeper of your soul. And that is a bond that not even winter can break.